I'm Paul Nixon.
And I'm Clarice Nixon. We are college educators, and this is College Hacks. Today we're talking about meeting your professor, whether it's face-to-face or online.
Now, here's a general guideline, and this guideline is kind of a general guideline for everything we do. Remember context. You want to put yourself in the position of the other person that you're talking to. So the same way you have a context, you have a reason for communicating, they have a reason too. So keep that in mind and approach that person with that in mind. What are some examples? What are some cases in which it would be better to set up a meeting rather than sending an email?
One case is when you need an immediate response.
Okay.
In an email, you have no control whatsoever over when your professor reads the email or when your professor responds to the email. So if you need an immediate answer, email is not the best method. If you need grace for something, face-to-face is also better than email. There's so many things that happen in a face-to-face conversation, like gesticulations, which is this, face-to-face contact, smiling, tone, all of those things are missing in email. But in a face-to-face conversation, those things can help you if you need grace for something.
Face-to-face conversations are also better anytime you're really trying to strengthen your relationship. I would especially recommend trying to strengthen your relationship when you're dealing with professors in your major, right? So general ed professors, I'm not saying they're not important, but you might not see them ever again. Your major professors are much more likely to be with you through your process.
Right.
So you want to try to build your relationship so that they know how they can help you, because that's why they're there. So in this episode, we're going to give you 3 quick tips for when you have a meeting with your professor. The first tip is to remember facial expressions.
They make a difference.
Facial expressions matter. Now, if you don't have,
For example,
if you don't have control over your facial expressions,
gain control of your facial expressions. Like, it's going to help you in school, in relationships.
Learn the skill.
Yeah, learn the skill.
Learn it. And there's a good time to start practicing.
Right.
So try to control your facial expressions, both positive and negative. Just try to control your facial expressions.
So that might mean be intentional about smiling. So my personality, I'm not always smiling. Like, I don't walk around like this. Some people do, and that's great, but I don't. So I know that when I'm in a professional situation, I have to remind myself sometimes, make sure you're smiling. Right now in this camera, I have to say to myself, make sure you're smiling, because my facial expressions give off an attitude. My facial expressions are communicating something, whether I mean them to or not. So smiling is really important.
Eye contact, also really important. I gotta look right at the lens because I'm trying to make eye contact with you at home.
Right.
Even though you're not here in the studio with us, we need to look at the lens. So in the same way, you want to make sure you're making eye contact with your professor.
For example, it would be super awkward if I was talking to you right now, but looking at the thing that I'm looking at. Like, you can't tell, am I talking to you or not? Because I'm talking over there. There could be another person over there I'm talking to, but I'm talking to you. So eye contact is really important.
Now, this doesn't mean to be fake, doesn't mean to be phony, doesn't mean to pretend to be something you're not. What we're saying is control yourself, right? Control your facial expressions, make eye contact, smile. Those small things are very, very useful. So that's the first tip, is to be mindful of your facial expressions. Remember your face.
Tip number 2 is to have a clear purpose. This takes a little bit of planning. So before you meet with your professor, think to yourself, why do I need to meet? How can I communicate clearly what it is I'm looking for in this exchange? So have a clear purpose for your meeting.
So that goes for whether or not the meeting is your idea, or whether or not the meeting is their idea. In either case, in both cases, you need to have an understanding of why the meeting was called. So if you call the meeting, you need to steer the conversation. You need to say, this is why I called this meeting. If you didn't call the meeting, you need to be receptive and say, wait for them to say, because they're not going to just, leave you hanging. They're
the ones that called the meeting.
Yeah, they're going to say, this is why I called you in here. So be receptive. So you need to understand why the meeting was called. So have a clear purpose in that meeting, whether you called it or not. The third tip is to mind your surroundings, especially if your meeting is online. If you're meeting online, it's important that you have control over your environment, which means try to have a quiet room, a minimal cross traffic.
be dressed appropriately. Think about the noises in the background. Sometimes you may not feel like being in your room and you may be in a public area. But if it's a noisy public area, if you're in an online meeting, the person on the other side of the camera can hear all of that stuff. And sometimes it interferes with what you're actually trying to say, and we can't hear you because it's so loud in the background.
Turn your camera on.
Okay.
I've had meetings with people where they're talking and we're talking to each other and I'm looking at their picture,
Right.
and it comes off rude to me.
It does, and again, we understand that speaking to someone face to face, whether it's in person or online, can be intimidating, particularly if there's a power structure. So by that I just mean your professor is in charge of something that you're a part of. You're not I don't want to say boss, but you're not the boss. You're not the one in charge. So you may feel like you're intimidated by that power distance, but having your face, like your actual face, not a picture, makes a huge difference with online meetings. Another thing to keep in mind is that you really need a strong internet connection. Online meetings can be challenging if the connection is poor.
Yeah.
If you're speaking and it keeps going in and out, or if your internet connection just drops suddenly, you have to like recall the person. Like, it's a lot. So make sure you're somewhere where you know you're gonna have strong internet connection.
And we know that all these things aren't always possible, but
Right.
the idea is to be mindful and try to just control your surroundings as much as you can to maximize the effectiveness of your meeting.
Right. Is there anything we missed? Is there anything else about meeting with your professors that you want to know about that we didn't discuss? Shoot us an email and we'll get back to you.